So, hello everybody, this is the next episode of the FFM Music, the Soundtrack podcast. And today I'm here with Stephan Lembke from Galaxy Instruments, who's a sound designer and also a recording engineer. And we've worked together on a couple of projects, some of which we cannot name officially yet.
Yeah, sure.
So welcome here. And just as an introduction, can you tell us more about your involvement with sound design, how it started?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me, first of all, and thanks for having me here in your studio in Sofia. So I'm currently here recording with FFM Music, and so we took the chance and said, let's when we have some time off, let's take the time to record the podcast, talk about technology and sampling, sound design, and all this kind of stuff. And I basically have an engineering background, so I come from the whole recording bands, doing live mixing in venues and all this kind of stuff. And I luckily got an internship in a studio in Cologne, Germany, where my colleague Uli, or my now colleague Uli, my former boss, also did all kinds of popular music. So we recorded bands and did some musical recordings, vocals, guitars, all this kind of stuff. And he got into sampling by being hired by a producer who wanted to do a drum library. Mm-hmm. And he recorded with him years before with his band. And then he said, well, you got really nice drum sounds, so let's do it together and come with me as an engineer. So they went to Galaxy Studios in Belgium and recorded Simon Phillips, Kenny Aronoff, and so on, which was released on Best Service as, what was it called? I actually have to look it up. It was some, like one of the first huge drum libraries with also all kinds of MIDI patterns played by Simon Phillips, Kenny Aronoff, and so on. And during this project, I started as an intern in the studio, and then I started with editing, denoising, preparing 5.1 surround versions that they recorded. I think it was back in 2003 or 2004. And then he further moved into sampling territory, creating software instruments based on Native Instruments Contact. And so I also grew into this topic, basically, while still doing some typical engineering jobs on the side. Mm. And I think in 2012, everything got moved closer together, and then we released our first libraries with Native Instruments.
Yeah, and just for our listeners, I'm sure that most of the people that are going to listen to this podcast maybe already own most of them. So we have Thrill, which is an amazing library for especially horror and aleatoric effects. I've used it on a bunch of albums on that occasion, like library music. And also we have Una Corda. That was also Native Instruments, right?
Yes. Yeah. Basically, we started out doing some. Well, we started with the drum library, and then it went to the piano territory. We did some pianos released under the Galaxy Pianos name. And then we moved on to calling the whole thing Galaxy Instruments, and moved really close with Native Instruments. So basically, in the past, I think 10 years, we almost exclusively developed the libraries for Native Instruments and did not do any of our own stuff or setting up our own shop or anything. So it was basically, doing Native Instruments libraries. Yeah. So most of the pianos, except for the Alicia Keys, is what we did. Noah, Una Corda, the definitive pianos, and also, like you mentioned, Thrill, Mysteria, the choir, aleatoric library, and Rise and Hit, orchestral effects, risers.
Noir was actually a very nice library. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we get that a lot. And we also like it quite a lot. So yeah.
Well, that's the thing about sample libraries. That the thing about sample libraries is that you sometimes get into the position where you don't get enough of something. For example, I don't get enough pianos.
Yeah.
So I have basically most of the pianos on the market.
Yeah.
And I think that currently maybe Keyscape has given me, although I don't particularly like the pianos in Keyscape. I like everything else.
Oh yeah,
which is really nice. The pianos are, I mean, they are nice. I'm using them, but there's so much variety in all the other instruments that are in the library, and the actual pianos are. I think it sounds to me it's as if, maybe I'm wrong, as if it's like 2 or 3 pianos with different EQ settings and reverb settings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's an upright. They also did a tech upright of it.
That's right.
And C7, Yamaha C7 Grand, I think.
That's right.
And we also like them quite a lot. And I think the main thing, I think we actually own every piano library that's on the market, only for comparison purposes. And also, I mean, there's some music production happening on the side from time to time. And we are always amazed by having a song, trying to add piano, and then going through the libraries and just see what the instrument and especially the recording sounds like, and some fit in the mix perfectly and others just don't work. So you have to apply all kinds of effects afterwards and make them so different that it doesn't really make sense to go with them in the first place. And so and I also think it's a lot of it is about the feel of the instruments. So recording MIDI through with your keyboard and just having a basic piano, some kind of even general MIDI piano, and then skipping through libraries afterwards doesn't really satisfy the whole thing. So it really it totally feels different. We also did comparisons with all kinds of keyboards. So we had like 6 different keyboards in our control room, and then went through the libraries, and just if you play it on a different keyboard, it almost feels like a different instrument, since it reacts differently. So even selecting a different dynamic curve makes a huge difference, and that's why it makes sense to somehow select the sound for the music that you are recording, or just see, okay, which piano would fit frequency wise, or which has what amount of room in the sound, and then actually playing with this piano and also going through the settings and making sure that it has the performance and the dynamics that you want from it and that fit the song.
Well, I think that maybe pianos are the hardest. I wouldn't say the hardest things to sample, but it's really painful, because first of all you need to get a very nice release tail of it, so it actually becomes very long to record it properly.
Yes.
Yeah. And opposed to other instruments which are even like percussion, for example, you get like a click and that's it, and you
or looped instruments. Like if you tell a brass player to play a low note for 10 seconds, there's no chance in hell that he's able to do that, so or she. But with pianos, I mean, I think even if the sounds are 10 seconds long, it would fit 95% of the use cases, I guess. I mean, in cinematic music or in film composition, it's a bit different, but still there's all kinds of material that we've recorded that I guess no one has ever listened to. So I sometimes feel the urge of adding a scream at the end at 45 seconds of a piano note, just to see if someone is going to catch it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we also had a similar discussion with on our sampling, sampling company, Strezov Sampling. So our engineer was we did a felt piano, but a felt upright, so even a smaller sound, so to say, in terms of length. And he was like, who's gonna need like 20 seconds of release tail on a piano or something? Why did you capture this? That's waste of free space,
hard drive space.
Space. And I was like, well, sometimes you might need like a bow and then like a drone at the bottom. You leave the pedal on and then play something on top. And he was like, that's only you. Most of the people were just using, as normal people.
Yeah. In the end, of course, that's there's one thing, if you look at different libraries, I don't know if users do that, but if you have a look at a shop and then they say, well, that's a really nice detailed recorded grand piano, and that is 8 gigabytes in size. And if you then come along with a piano that has reduced length of each note, and then it has maybe 2 gigabytes, which is nice for your hard drive, you may have the idea, well, it can't be that detailed because it's only quarter of the size and all this kind of stuff. But actually, it just doesn't make sense at all. There was one sample instrument out there. I think it was, I don't remember the name. It was a drum set, and it was a drum sound similar to the band Paramore in the year 2008, 2009, something like this. And it had round robin samples on the kick drum, the snare, the toms, and the cymbals, I think. And it was just like 3 or 4 repetition samples, 1 dynamic layer. The whole thing had 28 megabytes in size. So it was super small, but it was just amazing. The sound was, they nailed the sound right away. And if you do pop music and you need it as a sample replacement tool, they nailed the sound. So basically you have the repetition sample, so you're going to be fine with it. But if you want to sell it and they say, well, it's 28 gigabytes, then everybody's going to be like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to pay $1 per gigabyte or something like this, right? If there are libraries out there with 10 gigabytes for the same price point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, sampling is really weird. I think that at least, I don't know how you feel yourself. I kind of got into the situation of getting into this large black hole of, just doing more and more, not because I need it, but because there's something more to push or some other idea to record. That doesn't necessarily mean that people would need this. Yeah. But it's just like the thrill of, having to sample, and it becomes kind of an obsession.
Yeah. Being able to do this.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you feel it this way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
I mean, sampling a grand piano with the lid on and without the lid on is super crazy because it's like twice the work and everything. And it's a small detail, or it's not such a small detail, but there's a detail that changes in sound. And it might be worth it.
What about the pianist?
They usually, that's what I also said when we recorded yesterday. We had a new musician here who recorded samples for the first time. And I also told him, well, they're usually after the sessions, there are 2 scenarios. One scenario would be that that the musicians say, well, it was really a learning experience for me and a lot of practice to control the tone or to control the dynamics and the way I strike a key or the way I bow the string or something. And I really get into this state of almost meditation-like practice. That's the one thing. And some people are excited about it and say, well, that's really cool. So I really liked it a lot. It was exhausting, but cool. And the others are just like, never call me again. That was so stupid. I don't know what you're going to do with it. It's just like, who needs this?
Delete my phone.
Yeah.
My phone number.
But for the pianos, I mean, most of the time we are actually the pianist. So,
okay.
Because with musicians, if it's an instrument where you don't have to have the super detailed sounds in your fingers for playing guitars, strings, or blowing your horns or something like this. There are other aspects in the sample recording that a normal musician or a good musician usually doesn't practice or doesn't really care about. For example, as you mentioned, a release or even the release, not the reverb tail or the decay tail of a note, which is also has to be quiet, obviously. But the release is even harder. If you stop playing the note, if you have a trumpet and you stop playing a note after 3 seconds, you really have to make sure to be super quiet. There shouldn't be a cracking chair. There shouldn't be, releasing releasing your fingers or releasing even your muscles, since that could cause a crack on the chair or some kind of background noise that you don't want in the sample. And it's really hard for some people. Yeah, it's also hard here for when, sometimes because the musicians, especially even when they're recording music, they would, I would say that's a sort of a relief, especially when they get like
a very hard passage and they do it right, immediately afterwards they're like, okay. And then you get like a noise in the release there, and we have to do it once more again from scratch. A funny story. We have this a good friend of ours, Nick, who's been playing. He's been a principal percussionist here for quite some time, and I don't know whether this story is for a podcast, but anyway, it's funny. So here we go. So he was recording orchestral percussion sampling for us. It was an in-house project. So, and he was doing the tubular bells. Yeah. And we wanted to get them chromatically. So record each and every one of them with multiple round robins and no dampening of the sound. Yeah. So that's quite
super long.
So he was recording like 6 hours, and he's like meticulous when it comes to round robins and dynamics. He makes them even. We don't need to do much afterwards. Yeah. So, and the the engineering team and some of the guys working on the sampling project, we were upstairs in the control room, and so we were like, I mean, this guy is so concentrated. Yeah, it's absurd. We need to do something. I mean, it's not real. He's like a AI, like a machine,
like a robot.
So there's this big screen in the stage. So they decided to open up a porn site and open a porn movie and to play it on the large screen
that he sees while he's looking, trying to get the release and the decay. Yeah,
that didn't bother him much. I mean, we could see on the camera that he smiled. It was funny for him, but
no noise.
No noise. He just went through. So it was a funny situation.
It's also like one of the principal players told us 2 days ago that he really admires the work we do when we record samples, just really focusing on the consistency of the notes, of the attacks, of the pitch, of the dynamics, of the length, of the release tails, of everything basically, and doing this stuff for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, 13 hours, something like this, and always changing the instrument, and especially when I record here and we do orchestral stuff, I feel it's always like a sprint in the end. It starts as a marathon, and you think, okay, we got 8 hours to record something, so let's ease into it and start with like being really meticulous. And then after the 2/3, you realize, okay, we might cut it a bit close with getting everything done, and then the time for the musicians don't change, since you have the same score that you've written, and the low note length stays the same, and you still have all kinds of articulations and dynamics to go through. But inside, you're just like, okay, we we have to get that done and get to the next one. And because if we change the mic setup, or if we move on to the next instrument, I mean, it wouldn't be the same sound, and it's really difficult then to record one dynamic layer of staccato notes, and then 2 days after recording the fortissimo layer or something like this. It just
that's right.
Doesn't really work.
One of the hardest things to do in our stuff, because when we do some of our bigger sampling projects that are like orchestral, and all those sessions are split in between, sometimes between months even. And sometimes it's really hard to get a nice balance. That's why we like to do the post-production in a very old school-ish way. We've talked about this, that we actually go through the instruments and we play them. Sometimes it doesn't work the way we planned it to. Yeah. But just to try to make it as balanced, because that's another issue that is apparent in some sample library developers, that you would get, because normally you'd have the instrument range which won't be balanced normally. Yeah. But sometimes they also, they just don't do this sort of balancing which is something that the musicians also don't think about when they're recording. That for example, like an oboe can have a very piercing high end and then a very soft low end, but somewhere in the middle you can get like a peak just because of the instrument, or just the player felt like, I don't know, giving a bit more. So that's another aspect, I think, of the sample library making, is to also balance and prepare everything so that it becomes like it's like a manufacturing an instrument in the old days, in a way.
Absolutely.
So you build one.
But and I also think, especially with orchestral stuff, it's the big problem is like you need the musicians, you need the studio, you need the stage and everything, and so it's more expensive than if you sit down in your own control room or in your own little recording space with a nylon guitar and just recording dynamics on this one. And then you think, okay, maybe I take 2 more days, and instead of trying to get 5 dynamic layers, I'm just recording 10 dynamic layers. And in the end, I will create an instrument with 5 dynamic layers, and I will have enough material to throw out the second half. So maybe there's always 1 dynamic layer in between that you will throw out to get a really even sound across the whole instrument and a realistic sound. But with orchestral, you really have to focus on it while you're recording, since you can't really go back and you can't book studios for, 3 weeks on end and just making sure that you record, double the material you need or you plan to use, because it's just too expensive and too much work.
And even as you said, even if you can, afford this and you do it, and you cannot just go and record dynamic 3 out of 7.
Sure.
Then it will be a different sound, different instrument, maybe a different player.
And also for the musician, I mean, they are not used to recording more than the typical dynamics that are written. So if you tell them, well, record 12 dynamic layers, then they ask you, where are the dynamic layers? I don't understand it. I have my dynamics. They go from piano pianissimo to forte fortissimo. And that's basically about it. And it's, I also had some sessions where I recorded like a pop horn group, and I was sitting in the studio in front of the section they recorded together, and they played I think it was something like staccatissimo or false or deutz or something like this, so the big bandy stuff, and it was something like fortissimo, forte fortissimo, really loud stuff. They recorded together, so there was more chance of someone being not as loud or balanced or being a bit off intonation wise. And then I always, I use gestures just to make sure that we don't have to stop the recording. And then I told them basically doing the circle, and then please record it again. And after we recorded the same note in the same dynamics for the 6th time, I just stopped. I realized after the 4th time, they were looking really strange at me. And after the 6th time, I stopped the recording, and I just said, okay, guys, it looks like you have a question. We are still not there. We still need to have this note. And they just said, well, we did the same stuff 6 times. And for us, playing it was exactly the same. So what do you want? Please tell us. So and I was just like, it was just, the saxophone was a bit down on this, and and it was a bit too long on the 3rd one, and so you are really thinking in different parameters. And for the musicians, it's basically just repeating until someone says that was okay. And you don't really know why was that okay, but they are not on the sampling side, and they don't know what happens when you process those sounds and try to make it even across a keyboard. And
sometimes also you get this, it's okay for you. It's okay. It has all the check boxes. And the musician is like, this didn't sound good. They have like a different perception.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us about how you look at sound design, because nowadays music and sound design is very much like connected. For example, Hans Zimmer Dune. let's say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's like a musical sound design, so to say.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think it's the hybrid sound. That's like the actual modern sound we have nowadays. And I think it's really funny if you listen to older things like, when I just half an hour ago I was checking out your your monitoring system here, and I listened to the theme of Jurassic Park by John Williams, and that's basically a classical recording. And when you watch older movies from the 90s, for example, at Christmas time, it's kind of a tradition for me to watch Die Hard, because Die Hard is a Christmas movie,
Michael
you know.
Kamen, yes.
Yeah, and I think about 5 years ago, so I realized, okay, that sounds really different all the way to the stuff that we know and are used to nowadays. Since all the effects, there are no additional effects, there are no risers in there, there are no hybrid sounds, there's not so much aleatoric, out of tune, weird clustery stuff. So it's basically straight up classical music with maybe a bit of a popular touch or so in it. And when you then compare it to Dune or some kind of the Marvel movies or all this stuff, I think it wouldn't work and wouldn't have the same impact if you remove all the sound design aspects, all the synthesizers. If you have an upright bass, and if you use this upright bass, plays some long notes and maybe has some tremolo here and there, aleatoric ad libido tremolo or so, and then you put a Moog synthesizer underneath with the low pass closed almost all the way, that you get this really super deep rumble, and you listen to it, and if you don't know how the sound came to be, you're just like, well, that's a huge recording of an upright bass, but basically it's an extension of this sound, and it adds more to the function, because if you listen to it in a cinema, you have all those subwoofers, the LFEs, and then there are all kinds of effects and rumbly things happening that you wouldn't have in the normal recording, or that would be more of an accident on the orchestral stage, low frequency vibration or something like this happening. So I think it adds a lot to the sound, and it doesn't need to stop at orchestral or cinematic things. So also in popular music nowadays, I did a lot of mixing for even some kind of in Germany we say Schlager, so it's
we have the same thing.
So it's really plasticky music in a way. And when we did this, they also there were some sounds that were more sounding like a keyboard, but there were some real guitars in there and some guitar solo things, and there were loads and loads and loads of risers, uplifters, downers, some kind of climax focus on the chorus. So there's a pre-chorus, and if you go into the chorus, there's some kind of white noise stutter rising in the back, or reverse cymbals, or reverse guitar distorted guitar chords, or piano notes, or something like this. And that added so much to the song, and if you removed it, it was just you basically were thrown back 20 years, sound wise. So I think it totally, for me, I come more from the acoustical side of doing music, so recording bands or playing in bands, doing live music. But even there are so many options to apply sound design, for example, changing out basses with synthesizers in some parts, or extending drum sounds with some electronic drum sounds, adding all those kinds of little effects here and there, and that absolutely makes the sound for me.
Yeah, and also when you say about rock music, for example, or pop rock music, it's kind of I think typical nowadays that you use like drum triggers.
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
So the sound of the drums itself is now becoming like a mixture between this hybrid, between a sample and a live recording.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, we had that a couple of times in music history, popular music history. When you think about drum sounds, especially, that I think that's where the first huge steps happened. I think in general, I mean in keyboards as well, but in drum sounds, it's really like looking at the disco era and looking at some kind of late Motown stuff and then early disco stuff, where the musicians really played damped down drum sounds in a small room. And then drum computers came out, like a sampled Linn drum, or even synthesized stuff like the 808 or so. A new kind of hearing developed for the people listening to the music, and they were just like, okay, this is a really cool groove and a really cool sound, and it must be a drum kit, because nobody knew about that this would be a drum computer or so. And then people started to try to chase that sound, and also like taking their wallet and putting it on a snare drum to dampen it down all the way that they get the deep oof that you get when you pitch down the Linn drum, for example, the Linn drum sample, and really trying to match the sound of the original drum machines, because the drummers still want to play and still need to play, and they try to get the sound on stage, but it was a drum computer.
In a different way. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, it's absolutely, nowadays, everything is triggered. I mean, I also know a couple of people who record drums mostly without microphones. So they have an overhead microphone and the rest is triggers. Or they have a stereo overhead and the rest are triggers on the toms, on the snare, on the kick. And they even used like the real drum triggers, since the microphone, you are also able to replace a microphone signal, but it's not as fast as a trigger, since the trigger is only like a small glitch, so only like a that you get in the sound. And it's even easier for replacing, since you don't have any spill. So you only have the signal like, this is where tom 1 has to be, this is where tom 2 has to be. Yeah. And also people used to extend sounds in live performances quite a lot. I think in the late 90s, there was this new metal band Korn that did all kinds of like super metal weird stuff. And they always had this deep sine wave drop, which they had on a drum trigger. And so they played the live show, and in the breakdown part, they just hit this pad, and there was just like, ooh, and the whole venue was shaking. And then everybody else did it, and everybody got those drum triggers and tried to replicate it.
Do you know the drummer Michael Shack?
No.
He's a really nice guy, a fantastic drummer, and we worked together on a sample library that we did a couple of years ago, and he's a Roland drummer, so he shows all their V drums and whatever. So I was at the Musikmesse back when it was cool.
So 2014.
So I went. He had this booth especially for him. So he had like a drum kit with Roland drum triggers.
Yeah.
And also the Octopad and the other thing, the sampler, which was the Roland drum.
Like the drum brain, or with a separate pad or something?
No, it was again like an Octopad or OS something. I don't remember the exact model. So, and he was demonstrating, because he's like a live drummer / DJ, and he was demonstrating his entire like set of music, and all was done by him. So all the triggers, like sample triggers, all the drums, and
it must be then the SPDS,
yes,
the sample pad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I know. Basically every drummer who's playing live, I know, which are a couple in Cologne, they all have an SPDS.
Yeah. Nowadays, it's become some sort of a like.
It's a must-have, right?
Yeah, must-have. Exactly. Yeah. So it's really interesting that now we live in a time where some sort of a, because I think there was a huge development of music instruments in the 80s, in the 90s. We had MIDI, we had all the synthesizers, and then I think that maybe kind of around 95-ish, early 2000s, there wasn't that much development into that area.
Yeah.
For some reason, I mean, software got better, obviously.
Yeah.
And now we we get those really cool ideas like the hack and synth, like the Rolly, like the MP protocol, MIDI 2.0.
Yeah.
So the drum triggers, even though they're kind of old in a way, even Metallica used them.
Yeah.
But
but also the drum brains, like having better sounds, more dynamics, more space on the ROM or the RAM, depending, that you can use for more detailed sound. But I think it's connected since everything moved to the digital realm and moved to the computer, away from, for example, an archive sampler. You had a sampler on the computer, and I mean even the very first ones where the software was super expensive, and some composers I know carried their own computer only with the sample library on it to the studio just to make sure that they have their sounds with them.
Yeah.
And and then the software just got more extensive and we had more options to do that. And I think now it's going back into the hardware. So we have the software, and then you look at things like the Moog 1 synthesizer, which is like best of both worlds, having the analog synthesis of Moog, and then also having the eventide effects on the digital part, which are amazing for sound design. So I think there's a lot of stuff happening, but still performance-wise, I don't want a analog synth that I have to start that takes like 3 minutes to start and doing stuff like this. That's always too shaky for me. So I think that's what we're going to see in the next 5 years, 10 years, that there will be better hardware. Absolutely.
And then you play a bit with the synth and it goes like in a different key. So you need to tune it again.
Yes.
And it warms up, so it goes. Yeah,
it's almost like a grand piano. You have to keep the room temperature controlled and everything.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, synths are also kind of like with samples. Are you into synths? Yes, you are. Yeah. All right. It's kind of the same obsession. So you get, and not to mention when you get into like pedals and effects and
sure.
Then it's like a real deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's also connected. I mean, the whole Eurorack thing is basically guitar pedals. If you have effects, they are guitar pedals, and so a lot of guitar pedal companies came out with their Eurorack modules, since they only had to change the format and a few little things, and got their popular pedals into Eurorack format.
And now, when you were talking about, it's a bit of a different question, but when we get into the territory of analog versus digital, and you mix a lot, how do you prefer to do it all in the box, or do you use like outboard gear?
I prefer to do it in the box, but I have to say my box is different since I have an API box, so it's a little desk. But right. Actually. No, I try to create the sound before before it goes into the computer, and once it stays digital, it almost stays digital for the rest of the process. So especially if I do some sound design stuff, so I did some pad sounds, some weird modular synth sounds, for which I like then, which came up in different software instruments or different hardware and all this kind of stuff. So people just got sounds from me, from my back catalog, basically. And, when I do this, for example, modular stuff, then I set up my modular rig. It runs through my outboard gear. It runs at the last stage through an analog limiter, pendulum analog limiter, just to make sure that if there's super crazy resonance or so happening, I don't distort the converters and don't clip everything. And then once it's recorded and it's in the computer, I try to stay in the digital domain for preparing everything else. So that's how I proceed when it's synth sounds. When it's something like a grand piano, it can happen that there might be some kind of I have a curve bender EQ, so it might be, for example, we used it on Una Corda, so to really get out the high frequency felt sound, and it has really nice velvety highs, so it made sense to do it. But actually it only made sense on the felt version, if I remember correctly, since with Una Corda, I think it was 2015, and I bought my curve bender like, I don't know, 2 years before or a year before. And there was this one situation where we tried it, I think, on the cotton. I don't know if I remember correctly if it was on the cotton or the felt. But it was the two cases where we said, okay, let's do it with the curve bender and see how it goes. And also let's do it with a Messenberg plugin and see how it goes. And we really had to do a super double, triple blind A/B check to make sure to get the same signal and not be like, okay, that's a curve bender. That thing was super expensive, so we have to use it. But rather really blind listening and checking what sounds was better. And I just remembered that on the one version, it was the curve bender. On the other version, it was actually the Messenberg EQ plugin.
The plugin. Yeah.
And so, yeah. But then you have to be strong enough to choose and say, okay, well, I put it back in the box. It's okay. It stays in the rack, and we go for the plugin, since it also sounds really good. And if it benefits the sound, that's all. It's all great. And especially for mixing, there are things where I have to stay in the digital domain, since using multiple microphone setups, it's always about phase. And especially if you sample something chromatically, or have an instrument with such a huge range as a grand piano, there are of course some notes which are out of phase. So from the 88 keys, I would say there are maybe 20, maybe 18 keys out of phase in the recording setup. And if you record it with 2 microphones only, and that will be the mix later on, it might be more of a kind of a mastering thing then, before getting to the editing stage. Then it is what it is. So if you then put those microphones in phase, everything jumps in your stereo field. So the note that's supposed to be somewhere in the center. So for example, you have an E3, F3, which is the center note of the grand piano. And if this happens to be out of phase and you put it in phase, it might come from the left. Yeah. And then it's just like it's just weird. Yeah. And if you use the setup as is, it's totally okay if something is out of phase. I know the film guys, the scoring mixers, they can be a bit super picky about it, since they have to be mono compatible and all this kind of stuff. But in music, of course, if I record a grand piano, I have the same setup similar setup as if I would sample the instrument. And so there are out-of-phase notes in a performance if I record a grand piano, and that's basically what I try to give the musician who plays our instruments later on as well. So it should be close to the thing, to the real thing, on the real recording. But also, if you have multiple microphone setups, or use multiple microphone setups for a single mix, as we did with most of the Native Instruments pianos, or I think 99% of the things we do, it's a lot about phase. So if you have 4 microphones close to the instrument, and you have like a room microphone, maybe 2-3 meters away from the instrument, it could happen that if there's the E3 out of phase, and you flip the phase on one of the room mics, everything gets into phase, and the stereo perspective doesn't change, or doesn't change that much. And then you have some options. And this is what you can only do in the digital domain. If you try to do that analog, then you must you have a performance going through a sample session that takes like 14 hours, and at the always after, I don't know, an hour, you have to flip a phase or move like a slight delay by I don't know 6 milliseconds for one microphone or something like this, and that's only possible in the digital domain. So
that's right. And also you when you get at least me in my career, I get those questions from directors. Even I got like a request to open up a project from maybe 7 years ago, like an advertisement. Yeah. So they sold the whole brand to another country.
Oh, so, and there has to be a little change. Take out the traditional flute. We have to replace it with something. Also, sure.
And that's something that you have to do in the box entirely.
Yeah, also the mixing process is different. I mean, if you do something, you send it off to the producer, or you send it off to a band, usually they won't get back to you after 2 hours and tell you, well, it's okay, or vocal up or guitars down or something like this. It's more like they write you an email tomorrow saying, well, we'll listen to it to next week, and then in 2 weeks we're going to tell you if it's fine. And if you try to do this analog, there's no way that you can do it. So actually with my box, it's quite okay, since it's more of a summing box in the end. Yeah. And I have some inserts connected to the same channels. So this is what I mainly do for sound design purposes. So I know if I have something, like I do some drum one-hit things that I want to do put in a drum computer later on some kind of software, then I know if I send it out of my Pro Tools rig from to the channels 5 and 6, then I go through the distressors. If I go to 7 and 8, then I have the culture vulture and stuff like this. And I can also route it to multiple outputs and then mix it on the box to create one more hybrid sound design, mixed sound, adding reverbs, adding delays, adding all this kind of stuff. But that is only one performance for this one sound. So I really have to make sure or be sure that that's the sound I want. And if then somebody would call me up and say, well, this drum hit was cool, but could we turn down the reverb just a little bit, but stay the same on the distortion? I would really have to replicate everything and make sure that it is the same, and it will never be. So,
so do you have a folder with pictures?
No, actually not. No. That would steal so much time. So, But of course, I mean, there are some things like writing down, having Excel tables and writing down what synthesizer you used, or maybe creating some presets if it's a digital synth for some kind of pad sounds that you can remember, okay, at least it was this synthesizer and I started with this preset, or there's the preset on the instrument, or
And how does this translate with a live orchestra when you work? Because you've worked on some really super creative and uniquely sounding libraries, and I think for example Thrill was recorded in Bratislava.
Yes, Bratislava. Yeah, at the radio, I think it's radio station.
That's the big it's like a hall, right? It's
it's a super big hall, and we went there because of the hall size. I mean, it's I don't know how many cubic meters it is, but it's super huge, and they use it also as a venue. So there are live streamed recordings on the radio, and they do live streams, I don't know, every 2 weeks or so of this.
And maybe concerts, because
there are concerts, and they stream right away, and they also have people sitting there in the seats. So it looks more like a real philharmonic or something like this.
So how does this translate when you try to, because when you work with synths, you have this really kind of a idea of what you want to do, so you tweak the knobs and the controls and maybe add some effects, and that's it. How do you translate this when it goes to the musicians? Obviously you have scores and orchestration, but
I mean, there are some
beyond.
There are some parameters that you just try to change during the session. So you switch some things around. For example, when we did Mysteria, we had a full choir of 48 people. We also had 24 men, 24 women. Also had smaller sections as well. And then it also comes down even to positioning the musicians. For example, we had since it's aleatoric stuff. It's some musicians really like it and say, okay, it's new music, it's experimental. They get the idea of it, that it can be used for scores or for underscoring some things. And some others are just like, okay, let me sing my typical portfolio, and I really don't. It's so stupid what you do here. So do I really have to do something aleatoric? I would rather have you tell me what to sing at which point and write it down. And then when we did Mysteria, for example, we had two bass singers, and they really liked the whole thing, and they were standing next to each other, and they really were super expressive and everything. And I think also they were colleagues, they were used to singing together and all this kind of stuff. But it was a bit like back in the school. These guys are talking to each other all the time, so we have to set you apart, and one has to be on the left side and the other on the right side. And we had to do this for the perspective. So you have a stereo and you have an even image, because you can't have it right heavy or left heavy.
Yeah, of course.
And then you try to do something like transposing during the session, changing dynamics, also interchanging articulation. So the one part of the choir sings from the top, from the first bar, just straight notes, and the other go to bar 48, for example, where they do some kind of staccato ad libido ornaments and some little melody phrases they try to create on the fly. And we always had the luxury of having really cool people with us. So there was a for the Thrill library, for the orchestral stuff, we had a composer who did the orchestration, and he was also able to translate it really well and bring in new ideas during the session. So it absolutely made sense that we just saved some time and made sure that we recorded once as written, and then being able to have 2 or 3 modifications of the same score. And we also did that with the choir, and where we just did not record everything in Bratislava. We also recorded in Cologne in a large rehearsal space, a beautiful room, which is really huge as well. And we had a choir leader who was just working with us, and he was in the studio, and we explained what we needed, and he was able to sing some stuff to us and said, okay, he also wrote music for all kinds of experimental performances where some of the musicians have Bluetooth speakers in their pockets, playing music at the same time, some kind of drone sounds while singing and modifying everything overtone wise on the fly and doing this stuff. And so he was really into this topic. And so there was just a lot of luck for doing this stuff with him.
This kind of reminds me of the Arrival soundtrack of Johan Johansson, where they got the Theater of Voices, which is and they recorded in I think in Teldex.
Yeah, I also think so.
Yeah. And they did all those aleatoric experiments and vocalizations. You know, there is, I think it's a Decca, the label. Not Decca, sorry, Deutsche Grammophon. Deutsche Grammophon, there's like mini documentary.
Okay. Oh, I have to look it up. Well, that's good.
So
this is also a huge part, the inspiration. Like as you said with Thrill, I mean, it's also positioned like this. If you watch the Native Instruments trailer, which they actually filmed in their in the office basement where the people are supposed to put their bikes, I think usually, and so they had to take out all the bikes and make up this scene and the surrounding for filming something like a thriller or a horror movie or something like this. But when we did the research for the library, I mean, a lot of our Galaxy Instruments projects are involving a lot of research. So listening to all kinds of music, watching television, watching movies, listening to soundtracks, and making sure that we really find the space and the sound and the thing that people need or use out there. And even if you watch something like South Park, there are some orchestral effects in the background, and you're just like, okay, this could be in a horror movie, but it's actually a cartoon.
Yeah.
You know? I think it's more versatile than you realize from the get-go, or also from the marketing, since there's a lot of stuff where they have some, even in comedy shows, where they have some tension rising, that is what you can do with Thrill. So it doesn't always have to be the murderer with a knife, with a bloody knife. It can also be like somebody making a bad joke, or or losing their wallet or whatever.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
I also remember I think it was a making of The Sixth Sense, which I watched like a while ago, and James Newton Howard, he explained also that what they did was, this is just by memory, I'm not 100% sure about it, but they recorded like the choir talking for like 1 hour.
Yeah.
They just left the microphones there and just asked them, just whisper to each other, talk about anything, whatever.
Yeah.
And they put this throughout the entire movie from beginning till
Oh,
the
really?
end. Yeah, it's somewhere there at the background, and you can hear, it's like the ghosts and everything.
Yeah. I really have to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Absolutely. I mean, especially then if you know it from a making of, then you watch it twice or for the third time, and then you're just like, oh yeah, that's how the experience happens. And if you would mute it, it will feel different. Also, it's super subtle, but
you don't hear it, but you feel it.
Yeah. It will come up during. I mean, if there are softer passages or somebody's not talking at the time, and then there's something happening. So
yeah. I have to double check. It just reminded me your story reminded me about this.
Yeah.
And I also, when we spoke about sample libraries a bit earlier, I got reminded of another funny story. A friend of mine who's a brilliant composer, and another friend told me about him that he went to like some sort of a bazaar or like marketplace, and very obscure like antique shop, whatever. So they were selling CDs.
Yeah.
And obviously no one uses CDs nowadays. Yeah. And he, strangely enough, and he's very much into sampling and sample library synths and all this. So he found a CD by chance, like of some Roland samples from the 90s or something.
Yeah.
And he knew them, and he was searching for them because they had like a French horn inside, which was like one round robin, one dynamic, very simple stuff, you know. But it sounded amazing.
Yeah.
So he actually bought the CD, recorded all the samples, and then re-scripted it into Contact to make it his own. Because he was like, he told my friend that that's the best French horn that he's ever listened to.
Yeah.
Even compared to nowadays, stuff that's commercially available. Just something that's really special. Maybe it's a matter of consciousness and just thinking that this is I really like this.
You also you connect something with those sounds. Like if you use an old Roland JV 1080 or 2080 or so. If you just if you just start it up, connect your keyboard, put it on the speakers, and then step through the presets, it's just really the music history of the late 80s, early 90s. That's so right. Like Salt and Pepper and all those songs, they come that are presets from those units.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's maybe also something like you connect to it because you know it from somewhere, and you realize, okay, that's the sound, and that brings me directly to this
memory. Yeah,
to this memory. That's also like, I think Michael Jackson Thriller, the beginning is a synclavier, if I remember correctly, or a Fairlight or so.
I think it was a Fairlight.
A Fairlight, yeah, it could be a Fairlight, but it was basically preset number 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you look it up and there's somebody doing a Fairlight demonstration somewhere on the internet on YouTube, you will definitely stumble across this sound. But nobody was able to buy a, I don't know, $200,000 synthesizer keyboard. And so it was really rare that somebody would recognize this sound. But nowadays, since there are software versions of it or sampled versions of it, of course, people realize, that's how they did it. So they turned on the computer.
That's right. Yeah, turn it on and then press the key.
Preset one. Well, and it fit the sound, and it got super famous. And so nobody now is able to use this sound.
and
it always reminds you of
the same thing about, I think it was again Fairlight, the orchestra hit.
Yes.
Do you know that this was like Stravinsky?
No.
I think it was Petrushka, I think.
And it was from an existing recording?
It's an existing recording, so it's like the beginning or something, like you have this large tutti.
Yeah.
So somebody sampled it, put it on CD, and it became some sort of a, you know,
yeah,
hit.
90s or late 80s, early 90s classic.
Even nowadays, Bruno Mars, for example, you know, they're using.
Yeah.
So
I always wondered about that. I always thought, okay, if I have a full orchestra that I'm recording and there's some time left in the end, it would always be cool to record some risers or something, or an orchestral hit. But you really have to map it out and write it and score it.
And when you think of an orchestral hit, at least that's what I'm, you know, because it's very tonal.
Yeah.
You know, it's and very simple. It's as if everybody's playing like in unison or in the octaves or just a major chord, whatever. But it's actually from Stravinsky, so I would never say, "Hey, that's it's not
easy.
A weird chord like Rite of Spring." You know, chord. So that's
Also, from memory, I would say there's some kind of pitch bend. It goes down a little bit or so.
I think so. Yeah.
At the that's what I have in mind at the moment, where I think, I think that it could be like this, but that's a good story. Yeah, that's always this stuff that you find out behind the scenes, how something came to be, or where they found which sound, or from which library stuff is. Like, for example, all kinds of orchestral effects back in the day from Project Sam.
Yep.
Like you heard it all over the television, and also sound effects. So I also record some sound effects from time to time and have some friends doing it really extensively. And I worked in post-production like 10 years ago or so for half a year, doing a really cheesy German television show, doing some mixing, sound design, and also, basically putting everything together that came from the set. And there was one sound in the sound library from Sound Ideas, like the most famous library everybody knows out there. And nowadays, luckily, there are better things out there, or more diverse things. And there's one sound called Common Crow. And it was always like the season is changing, and it was a daily show. So there was so much of stuff happening. And when it was summertime, you had all kinds of birds and everything happening. And we also recorded some ambiences out there in the field. And when it turned to autumn, it was just Common Crow all the way. So through the autumn, through the winter to early spring, and then it went back into birds. And when you realize that there's, I think this sound Common Crow in Sound Ideas, there's like, 4 or 5 repetitions of this crow. And then if you listen to American television or German television or UK television, I can always spot the Common Crow. It's always there. There's always, if it's not the super summertime, there's always the Common Crow, and it's always the same sample. So
that's
it's like the Willem scream, right?
Exactly. That was exactly what I was gonna say. And it's
it's more the behind the scenes version of it, because I don't think many viewers will realize that they hear the same sound over and over again.
Of course, it's just us with damaged mindset of I even played a drinking game with a couple of friends.
Oh, really?
Spot the Willem scream, you know, especially if you're listening to like Star Wars or something, or Indiana Jones.
I also found it funny. Like I'm here for the second time this month, so I was here 2 weeks ago, and when I skipped through the television here, there were a lot of Bulgarian channels, and where they dubbed some of the American television series that they were showing. And I realized, since I usually watch English television, also in Germany, I don't watch German television, although maybe sometime if it's a show that's originally done in German, then it's okay. But if it's dubbed, I can't really focus on the story, since I always try to read the lips. So I can't really watch it. And here, when I looked at it, that was super weird, since I don't speak Bulgarian, so I couldn't understand what they were saying. I knew that the dub was super off, so it didn't have anything to do with the movement of the mouth. But then I realized that I found, because I couldn't focus on the sound, since there was almost no ambience in the background, no sound effect, anything. It was more just talking over the images. And then I spotted all kinds of problems and continuity problems in the filming. So stuff like the camera shifted from the right side to the left, and there was a guy standing in the background, and in the next shot he was gone, or the actors pushing someone to the hood of the cop car. And then there was a cut where they pushed him again and he was higher up than he was before. And this is stuff that I don't realize when I watch, usually when I watch television. I know that there are some people who spot it all the time, but I usually don't do it since I'm focused on the sound. I listen to the music and all this kind of stuff. But if that's gone, that layer, like I had it here, then I was focused on the image. So that always also showed me again the power of sound, basically the power of music and sound effects and everything else happening to underscore and enhance the image.
Maybe that's the reason I absolutely hate all the dubbings and dubs.
Yeah.
And my maybe one of the first experiences, and it was a terrible experience, was my sister took me when I was like early teenager. She took me to a cinema screening of a very old Italian movie, and there was like this lady who was dubbing everything
in
live,
in real time. Okay.
And she that was like her birthday or something, and she was like 85.
Yeah. So
she dubbed the entire movie. It was an action movie, old Italian action movie dubbed by an 85-year-old Bulgarian lady who speaks. She dubs all the characters and everything inside. It was awful.
Did she also do the sound effects? That would be cool. Like the cars and everything. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's I feel you.
And maybe as an ending note of this podcast, what would you suggest to composers nowadays when it comes to sound design, to sound entirely?
I think if you have the time, because basically what we do as instrument builders and samplists and people who do sound design and create sample packs and software and all this kind of stuff, we create shortcuts, like with the Michael Jackson Thriller, Fairlight. Somebody did that, and it was an easy way to go there and experience the sound in the right at the right time, and maybe use it as an intro starter where they were searching for something, how they could ease into the song. And so I think it totally makes sense to use instruments, to use presets, to not be scared of using a synthesizer presets. I mean, I did presets where I was sitting there working on a preset for 3 hours to get it right and say, okay, that's the sound. I hope somebody will open it up and use it as it is, and not open it up and turn all the knobs because they really have to change something to make sure they make it their own. That's one thing. And the other thing is, of course, I mean, you don't need 10 dynamic layers, or you don't even need chromatic sampling of 3 octaves of an instrument. So if you record something, and if you have a nice instrument lying around, it absolutely makes sense to, if you have the time, record some samples of it, maybe transform those, try looking into pitching things down and up, and also degrading things, and then resample those and try to come up with your own little sound print. Basically, you have an own identity you can create of the stuff you like. For example, I'm not so big on high frequency stuff. I really hate high frequency things. So if I have studio monitors that have so much high frequency, I can't almost listen to them. And I don't like microphones that push the high frequency to endless highs and all this kind of stuff. And that's my feeling of sound. I don't know. Maybe it's because I was standing next to my drummer for 5 years and his crash cymbals and it's like everything. But then it would actually be reversed by hearing loss. But this is stuff like everybody listens to things differently, and I think it totally makes sense to experiment. And you can even record 3 seconds of a sound and really make it your own, and to have some kind of a signature sound, and do some sound design just because of fun, and then use it and reuse it. if you find the time. And if you don't find the time, look into sound libraries and see what other people came up with. And maybe you find companies or producers or instruments that fit your sound perfectly. So that could be a good thing. And also when we when we talked about the orchestral hit, I think what absolutely makes sense if you record some orchestra things or some strings, some ensembles, some soloists somewhere like here in with 4/4 Music, I would always keep something in the backhand and make sure that if you finish 10 minutes early, why not record some orchestral hits? Why not record some risers? Why not record some sound effects of the musicians in the hall coughing or doing some pizzicato on their instruments ad libitum, some random sound designy starter things. So that's what I also heard when we did the Thrill recordings. We went to the studio and recorded everything, and in the end we had we had almost, 15 minutes left, but in orchestral recordings, you actually never have something left. You always have something in the backhand, and you always know what to record. And I think the whole staff, they were really impressed, since they recorded with some American composer 2 weeks before, and they said, well, they finished 20 minutes early, and then they said, well, the orchestra is here, we can record something, just let us know. And then they were just basically brainstorming for 15 minutes and then telling the orchestra, well, we don't have anything, so goodbye. And if you have the time, if you spend the budget, it totally makes sense to have have some additional stuff lying around. Maybe not for this project you're currently working on, but maybe for future stuff. And
we've actually had a large number of composers that would do, if time allows, they would do like rises, and hits and falls, and
absolutely
some effects that they can. Because the thing is that when you buy a library, you buy the library, but also 10,000 or 1,000 or 2,000 other people buy it as well. So they will have exactly the same sound
and you
as
become the common crow, right?
The common crow number 1, 2, 3. All right.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And it can even be something that you layer with other stuff. I mean, layering is also super huge. So doing some hybrid things in your studio, which you can do in your control room, some synthesizer risers, and add the orchestra to them. Makes totally sense. I mean, that's stuff that we did for Rise and Hit, and there you have the layers. You can also layer things with Rise and Hit. So if you record a riser for 4 bars, then you can, or for 2 bars, then you can also adjust Rise and Hit and let them play some synth or some orchestral percussion or whatever, and layer it with your own sound, and you created your own riser. Or you can do multiple. So absolutely.
Right. Thank you so much for being
George,
here.
Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. And,
absolutely.
Just before the podcast started, we were discussing all your hardwares and wiring and cables.
Yes.
So maybe we should make another
technical one.
Technical one.
Building a studio, setting up a control room.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There are all kinds of pitfalls and learnings. I think we are in the process of finishing our studios, our new studios in Cologne. We had to move the building or to a new building, and and you learn a lot of stuff. You realize that you don't know much about other things if they always worked before in the old building, and then you have problems in the new building.
The new one. That's right.
Then you get into all new kinds of topics.
That's another rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
All right. Cheers. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.